It's been called the new California gold rush. The effort to legalize sports betting goes to voters in a contentious, expensive fight.
The most expensive ballot measures ever, in real dollar terms. All of them huge operators with huge players with a nuclear arsenal of dollars. They go all in.
In person or online, two measures offering two different paths forward, both sides going all in.
California voters gave tribes exclusive right to operate gambling in California, and that's helped uplift them out of poverty, and Prop 27 undercut that.
Californians are excited about our measure. They want solutions to homelessness.
What happens here being closely watched around the country. We take a deep dive into what's next for sports betting in the Golden State.
California is going to continue to be this holy grail that operators chase if they don't manage to nail it down this election cycle.
Welcome to this KTVU special high stakes sports betting in California. I'm Greg Lee. This November, voters will decide if and how to legalize sports gambling in the Golden State. According to the American Gaming Association, 36 states plus the District of Columbia have legalized some form of sports betting. The states in red here are up and operational. The pink states legal, but not up and running yet. A lot of eyes on what happens in California with several pro teams, a massive population, and a lot of money at stake. We're talking about a multi-billion-dollar industry. The race has been a knockdown, drag-out fight. It's hard to go anywhere and not see an ad for sports betting.
Californians have a choice between two initiatives on sports betting.
27 would turn every cell phone and every laptop in California into a gambling device. And Prop 27 would send 90% of profits out of state and hurt Indian tribes who rely on revenues from in-person gaming.
Hundreds of millions in yearly funding to finally address homelessness in California. Vote yes on 27.
It's a direct attack on tribal gaming and Indian self-reliance, jeopardizing vital revenues that tribes rely on for education, housing, and health care.
So let's break down what each measure would do. If approved, Prop 26 would allow in-person sports betting at tribal casinos and 4 horse race tracks around the state. It's supported by dozens of Native American tribes. Here's a breakdown of how the state benefits. A 10% tax would be levied on bets at racetracks for the state to use on things like schools, gambling enforcement, and money for the general fund. The Legislative Analyst's Office estimates 26 could generate tens of millions of dollars each year in tax revenue. Prop 27 would allow online and mobile sports betting for licensed tribes and companies like FanDuel and DraftKings. It's supported and funded by those online gambling giants as well as 3 tribes. Here's a look at the numbers. The state would receive 10% of bets. 85% of that would go towards housing and homelessness services, creating an annual stream of cash. The state estimates 27 could generate hundreds of millions in revenue each year. So what do the political parties think? The California Republican Party is against both measures. State Democrats against 27 and neutral on 26. And Governor Gavin Newsom, here's what he said about 27.
Read between the lines. Yeah, I mean, that's not a homeless initiative. I think some of the money they're saying going to homeless, but I just marked something rather significant. And that is the state of California has committed $14.7 billion. We're not looking for an initiative to get us in the homeless business. We're in the homeless business. So I know initiatives and folks will say anything, and perhaps that initiative will provide a few dollars.
Despite all the ads and talk about these two measures, the poll numbers show voters are likely to reject them. With 2 weeks to Election Day, this is what the latest survey from the Public Policy Institute of California shows. Both props falling well short of the majority needed to pass. 34% of likely voters say yes on 26, 57% say no. Worse for 27, 26% say yes, 67% say no. Voters will certainly have the final say. There is a science, though, behind ballot initiatives, and few people understand it better than Sonoma State political science professor David McEwen. He provided insight into the most expensive ballot initiative fight in U.S. history. Let's first just talk about the massive amount of spending that has been done on these two measures.
Look, if you think back to November 2020, this is when Proposition 22 was on the ballot. This is Uber, Lyft, gig workers. That ballot measure set records, the most expensive ballot measure ever. That particular election had $750 million in spending overall. Now, fast forward to 26 and 27. They will set records as the most expensive ballot measures ever in real dollar terms, and they're going to blow past what 22 did. You're talking about something that's probably going to hit $600 to $700 million, just the two of these, on the yes and no side for both of them. And overall, we could go past $700 million. That doesn't even say or add in the other 5 measures on the ballot. So the potential for this election is, considering that 26 and 27 are driving everything, is that you could hit somewhere north of $750 million in this election and as much as $1 billion. Only the U.S. presidential election is more expensive than California ballot measure proposition elections, the second most expensive elections in the free world.
There was a huge pot at stake here. Both made big bets.
All in.
All in. And now we're headed for a bust.
Most ballot measures fail. All right, 2 out of 3 historically in the process fail. And this particular election, 26 and 27, going to the ballot, where DraftKings and FanDuel couldn't agree with the tribes, for example, or the card rooms, all of them huge operators with huge players with a nuclear arsenal of dollars. They go all in, and most voters, when they're faced with this kind of gambit or this type of choice, they opt out. They say no. A pox on all your houses. This is known as counter initiatives. So the way I explain it is you spend lots of money, you spend lots of money, you spend lots of money, and then you spend too much money, and each additional dollar leads to less than 1 vote. And so it produces diminishing marginal utility, fancy economics, right? But the idea is that it returns less than $1 for 1 vote. This is why we never had Governor Whitman back in the day. This is why big spenders tend to spend too much money or go over the over the pivot, if you will, and then they're spending too much money and voters kind of push back against that.
There's no question people still want a piece of the pot that is California sports gambling. So what do you believe happens next?
Yeah, so even if these 2 ballot measures were to pass, right, it together, and the way 27 is written, it can be implemented, but the forces of 26 would sue 27, it'd be tied up in court. So this is really something that looks for 2 kind of avenues. One is a legislative solution, some type of legislative compromise between the different types of tribes, the big players, the lighter players, dealing with those card rooms, what to do with off-track betting, like for example with horse track, and what to do with the heavy hitters that are online, like DraftKings and FanDuel. You've got to put all that soup together. That's a heavy lift for the legislature, which means there will always be one player or a series of players that will want to play in what we call the parallel legislature, that will want to play in the playground of direct democracy. And that sandbox is something that they have experience in, they will have gone forward with, and they'll have that polling data that shows that Californians are largely disposed to let the tribes do X, Y, Z. So that'll lead to a very great difficulty to get a legislative solution done. You'll have a governor who'll be looking to what comes next. You'll have a legislature that'll have a lot of new people. So if you come back to the ballot in 24, you're going to have to watch the money, because the money will have to be rising, but not tipping. And at the same time, even if they pass and there's a ballot measure or something that goes to the ballot from the legislature, you could see a referenda that comes back in 2026. So there's a long game here, and that long game is going to be costly, it's going to be negative, and that's where it portends to look closer to a legislative solution than a ballot measure solution. There is one element here, and that is initiative politics usually makes for unusual bedfellows. It makes for unusual friends and alignments. That is something, if we can see moving forward, that could lead to some type of let's have détente, let's have a legislative solution, let's get this done. And then those that are left outside of that room, that are left standing, like the card rooms, could move forward, or other minor tribes, to put something on the ballot moving forward. It's a battle that's just been joined. It's a battle that may actually spill over to 2024 with big bucks at stake.
Prop 26 provides a pretty darn good framework for how we can introduce sports betting, how we can establish sports betting in California.
Our measure raises hundreds of millions of dollars each year. It would provide real meaningful solutions.
Still to come, a final pitch from each campaign. We'll hear from Yes on 26 and Yes on 27 as they try to get out the vote ahead of Election Day. Stay with us. Through the course of the battle for sports betting, we've heard strong messages from each campaign. The retail measure, Prop 26, has focused much of their attention on stopping the online measure. Here's what Yes on 26 spokesperson Kathy Fairbanks told us.
Many have pointed to this UC Berkeley poll. Only 31% of likely voters supporting 26, less so
for 27. So what do you make of these numbers that we've seen?
I think we're seeing confusion among voters, which is understandable. There are two sports betting measures, and they're wondering which one is which. Also, the Yes on 27 campaign has spent $100 million plus on deceptive advertising, trying to convince voters that tribes are in support of 27, when the overwhelming majority of tribes are not in support of 27, they are supportive of 26. So everybody, it all turns into a big soup in the end, and voters are just confused. The good news is that our coalition's priority has always been to defeat 27. And so on that component, it's good news for us because we want Prop 27 to fail.
Is there hope from this coalition that 26 advances?
We know from our internal polling that passage of both 26 and 27 it's highly unlikely.
How concerned were these tribal leaders about 27 cutting into what they have continued to make from this state for a very long time?
It's a big concern. 20 plus years ago in 2000, California voters gave California Indian tribes the exclusive right to operate casino-style gambling in California. And we know from polling that voters believe that tribes have done a very good job with that. There's a lot of voter support for tribes. They support 150,000 jobs a year. They generate $12 billion in wages. They contribute about $5 billion annually in state and local and federal revenue shares. There are a lot of moving parts, and it's a big deal. It's a big commitment. It's a big responsibility, and a lot of things will have to align to make something happen. It may not be 2024. We may be talking about 2034. I don't know, but I wouldn't assume that things will be hunky-dory in 2024. I think if you listen to the corporate operators, they seem to indicate they're coming back in 2024. But unless they have support from the tribes, it will be another failed effort. That much is very clear. There are people in California who do want to bet on sports. That much is clear. It's not a majority, but there are a number of people, obviously. Giving them the opportunity to go into a tribal casino and make their bets, just like you would go to Vegas right now, or Reno, or wherever, or South Lake Tahoe, for example. Opening up a sports book. It's fun, it makes sense, and we could have had it with Prop 26, but other circumstances got in the way in 2022.
At the Global Gaming Expo earlier this month, the CEOs of FanDuel and DraftKings acknowledged a difficult path this year, but vowed to keep trying. We have reached out multiple times to the Prop 27 campaign via email, text, and calls, but they did not respond to our requests to include them in this show. It is important to us that you hear directly from them. This is from a previous interview this summer. When you hear her say things like this will lead to underage gambling and not enough is done to protect and regulate that, what would be your response to that?
I mean, those are just simply false attacks. Look at the experiences of 23 other states that have legalized online sports betting. They're proving that you can do so safely and responsibly. In our measure, actually, we require that everyone who offers online sports betting in the state of California, that all of those platforms have to provide age verification and background checks to ensure that every person who's placing a bet is over the age of 21.
Let's go back to this, the homelessness piece of this. Talk about how much money potentially could be going to the state.
They found that it would raise hundreds of millions of dollars each year in permanent, ongoing money. That's money that you can rely upon year after year. In the state of California, we don't have a permanent revenue source to fund homelessness projects and to get folks into permanent supportive housing. So as we face this bear market, as we face budget deficits, that money is all going to be on the chopping block. Our measure would fix that and create permanent solutions for this problem. There are three different ways that tribes benefit from our measure. First, no sports betting platform is allowed in the California market unless they partner with a California tribe. So that's big number one. Way number two, tribes themselves can offer online sports betting. And then those who don't offer online sports betting get 15% of our measure's revenue, which would double the amount of money that non-gaming tribes receive from gaming in California. So this is a win-win-win, and that's why you're seeing more and more tribes, and you will see more and more tribes come out and support our measure.
We have already seen a flurry of ads and a flurry of spending from both sides here. Why is it so critical to make sure that you are in every media market in California and that you're getting in front of voters, a record number of voters, before they go to the polls?
I mean, California is an expensive state. It's expensive to communicate here. Our focus is on ensuring that Californians have the facts on our measures, because we know if Californians understand the Solutions Act, they'll support it. They want more solutions to homelessness. They want to legalize and tightly regulate online sports betting. So when they hear about our measure, we know that they'll support it.
Nathan, final pitch to voters here.
Vote for the Solutions Act. It creates hundreds of millions of dollars each year to help fight homelessness, fund mental health treatment and addiction treatment, all by tightly regulating online sports betting and ensuring minors don't participate.
As we told you, dozens of tribes have put their support behind Prop 26, saying the online measure would threaten tribal sovereignty. We spoke to Jacob Mejia from the Pechanga Band of Indians, who says no matter what happens in this election, sports gambling should run through the tribes.
Very, very modest proposal. We know there is voter support for that concept, for that idea, and we know that there is strong voter support for continued tribal self-sufficiency. Look, they see all of the investments the tribes have made, not only on tribal lands, but in their respective communities.
Jose Simon, the chairman of the Middletown Rancheria of Pomo Indians, who's supporting Prop 27, said the Solutions Act protects tribal sovereignty and will allow every tribe, not just those with big casinos close to big cities, a chance to directly benefit from online sports betting in California. The measure puts tribes firmly in control of online sports betting in California. Both measures allocate funds or the opportunity to use money to combat gambling addiction. But is it enough? Addiction experts are studying the rise of legal sports betting across the country and its impact on health and wellness. Here's Dr. Timothy Fong, co-director of the UCLA Gambling Studies Program. You are an expert in human behavior and the causes of problem gambling. So what were your thoughts when you saw these two propositions introduced, 26 and 27?
California's been trying to expand sports betting for many, many years. This is not the very, very first time. So my thoughts were, this is an opportunity for us to bring the discussion about the impact of gambling on the public health of California. Prior to that, many people weren't talking about it. And again, right now, today, we already have sports betting in California. It's just unregulated. It's just not taxed. It's just a little shadowy, easily available, highly accessible. So it's not like this was going to be, oh my gosh, we're bringing in millions and millions and millions and millions of new dollars and people. It was bringing attention to an issue that already was happening. For me, when I first saw it, I said, well, it's about time we put some real political capital and attention to this issue so we can actually discuss it across all the different lenses that we have about it.
As we discuss it, one of those lenses, and taking a quote of yours, 1% at this moment of Californians have a gambling problem. Do you think legalizing it and creating these constructs, whether 26 or 27, would increase that number on any scale?
Oh, there's no doubt. I mean, we're already learning from other states that have legalized sports betting. They've seen increases in calls to the gambling helpline. They've seen more people coming into treatment, but there's also more attention being paid to the issue. So when you actually talk about it more, there's going to be more things like this: media coverage, educational initiatives, conferences, discussion, which will bring people out of the woodwork who are already suffering or who don't realize they have a problem, but now they do because they saw the ad or they saw a piece on that on television. So the larger question is really, well, how do we mitigate and reduce the damage, the public health damage that could come from legalizing, expanding a behavior that does have addictive consequences? The real question will be, will there be resources readily and easily available.
On that note, when you look at both of these propositions, there is money set aside or opportunities to have resource set aside at the state level to address the issue of gambling addiction. Is that enough for you or as a doctor in this, or does this create necessary safeguards if they were to pass?
But I look at the buckets that are needed for prevention, education, treatment, research, and you can have those numbers go as high as 30, 40, 50 million a year. Right now, that budget is around $8 million a year. So I certainly think there's a lot more that could be done because gambling behavior impacts so many other kinds of behaviors. You think about relationships with family, financial relationships, employment productivity, even potentially climate change, traffic. I mean, there's a wide variety of impacts of gambling that should certainly, I think, be studied and figured out how we can improve. Bottom line is, I think about gambling we regulate in California. The whole point is to make our overall quality of life in California better. That's how it's supposed to be, right? And I think whatever that number may be, will change from year to year. But I can certainly say right now, we're definitely short in terms of funding for treatment support, for education, and for really handling the patient demand from people who want help for gambling addiction. That narrative has to be that gambling is an aspect of public health. It is no different than quality of the air or water quality or taking out the trash or tobacco and cannabis. We have to ensure that these products are safe for the public to consume and participate in.
If California were to go forward with some form of legal sports betting, obviously it would have a very big impact on what operators are doing in the U.S.
Pass or fail, what's next for sports betting in California? After the break, an industry expert weighs in on what to look for in the future and what it would mean to add our state to the list of places where you can put a wager down on your favorite team. No matter what happens in November, there's no question there will be more efforts regardless of what voters decide. And cracking into this market would be a big deal. Covers.com industry expert Jeff Zakadny explains.
To use a gambling analogy, just how big the pot is of sports gambling in California if it was legalized.
Yeah, the potential pot is huge. California, obviously, the most populous state in the U.S. And if you're just going off of some of what we've seen from the other legal sports betting states, for instance, New York, where it's not uncommon for New York to post a monthly handle or total wagering of $1 billion or more. And so that's a state that has around half the population of California. And so if you go off of that, it suggests that there's the potential for a lot of wagering in California. Then also, too, we have some industry estimates that kind of peg the revenue that could come from the legalization of sports betting in California from somewhere in the region of $2.5 billion to $3 billion a year. And that revenue, of course, is what comes after you pay out winning bets, things like that. So it's not the total wagering, it's what you would sort of be left with after you settle up all the wagers that have been made. It is a gold rush for operators that want to get into the market for sure. This is a very, very significant market for them in the grand scheme of things. Obviously, some of the things we talked about already, huge population, big economy, also a very robust market for sports and sports fandom in general. You have a lot of major league teams that are located out west. So these are all things that kind of contribute to that excitement that operators have for legal sports betting in California and why they're pushing or have been pushing so hard to get these propositions over the line.
How does this impact the rest of the nation, as it were, particularly the states where sports gambling is still not legalized?
Well, it's sort of a unique situation in that while California is the state that has such a hefty presence when it comes to certain other matters of public policy, whether it's around carbon emissions, things like that, it's kind of the reverse when it comes to legal sports betting, because you now have a majority of states in the U.S. that already have some form of legal sports betting or have legalized it, haven't quite launched it yet. And so now that sort of puts California in that crowd that hasn't taken that plunge, which is sort of unique for the state. And so I would say if California were to go forward with some form of legal sports betting, obviously it would have a very big impact on what operators are doing in the U.S. because They may need to channel more resources towards the state to try to capture the market, to try to compete for some of these customers that are now available to them. That could have an impact on some of these previous states and the sort of efforts they're seeing from operators in those states. Operators, they're already starting to think ahead to 2024, maybe even 2026. They're starting to reframe the conversation. If the operators, the online sportsbook operators, were to take another run at that in 2024 to get something on the ballot, it might actually be to their benefit to try to work out a bit more of a compromise with the tribes, try to make something work that way. So you don't have such a robust opposition to your efforts in trying to get online sports betting legalized. You have a very powerful group in the tribes that are pushing back against them. And obviously it's having an effect on what voters are thinking about the measures.
If gambling has become a problem for you or someone you know, call this number, 1-800-GAMBLER, for free confidential help. Election Day is November 8th. Go to KTVU.com election for full coverage. Thank you for joining us. I'll see you next time.